Opening your eyes to the sterile glow of a hospital room isn't how anyone dreams of waking, certainly not when you're teetering on the edge of 70. Still, as Sarah Jenkins often quipped, at her age, you risked not opening them at all, or worse, glimpsing a disguised bearded gentleman who might just be St. Peter, the keys to some celestial gate jingling a rather uninviting tune. Neither option had ever truly appealed. So, caught between the fabled light at the end of the tunnel and the harsh, unforgiving glare of institutional lamps, Sarah had always favoured the latter. But this particular dawn felt different. It was a waking nightmare, a leaden blanket smothering her. At first, she simply attributed the fuzziness, the strange sense of unreality, to the medications seeping through her veins, through the IV line, a cool, insistent pressure against her skin. When her hearing, too, seemed to betray her, it couldn't be. Surely her 2 sons, her 2 precious boys, the very reason her heart had ever known joy and purpose, couldn't possibly be standing in her sterile sanctuary, coolly dissecting the fate of her apartment, could they? The thought was a jarring chord, out of tune with every memory she held. Yet, as their voices, once the sweetest melody, now grated against her ears, a faint flicker of hope ignited within her, only to be brutally extinguished. Her heart, already so weary and worn from a lifetime of caring, simply skipped a beat, then another, a painful, irregular rhythm. She managed to crack open her eyelids, confirming the familiar, impersonal landscape of the hospital room, but the strength to turn her head, to fully confront the source of the insidious whispers, was simply not there. And perhaps a primal instinct whispered it was better this way. Trapped within her own body, her heavy eyelids drooping shut once more, she became an unwilling eavesdropper to a conversation clearly never intended for her ears. "I just can't, Owen. I've got a new restaurant opening next month, demanding every ounce of my focus. If I have to take on Mum too, I'm utterly swamped." The voice, a low growl, belonged to Spencer, her eldest, her once glorious pride and joy. "And what am I, her nursemaid?" Spencer, the brilliant restaurateur, a fact Sarah had broadcast to anyone who would listen, had always been driven. His culinary empire consumed him. Love, even a fleeting kind, rarely lasted beyond a year. He was a comet, bright but ephemeral when it came to relationships. Still, her heart swelled when she thought of Owen, her younger son, the one who'd sketched whimsical posters for school plays, strummed his guitar with boyish enthusiasm, and captivated audiences from small-town stages. He'd never lost that artistic spark, now pouring his boundless energy into being a film director. And oh, how she'd beamed when she spoke of his marriage, of the grandchild soon to arrive, a new chapter, a fresh hope. She rarely mentioned that Owen hadn't invited her to his intimate, cosy wedding, as he'd called it. "Mum, you'd have been bored," he said, a casual dismissal that had stung far deeper than she had let on. Sarah hadn't argued, simply pressed into his hand the only true measure she possessed, her meagre savings. It was the last time she'd seen her younger son. That day, he and Lena came for the wedding gift, because Sarah, bless her heart, still hadn't mastered online banking and paid her bills at the post office, a quaint relic in a digital world. Both her boys, once fledgling birds in her cosy nest, had soared into their adult lives, leaving her behind like an empty shell. She'd called, of course, sending those little postcards, adorned with cheerful daisies and fluffy kittens, but the replies were always clipped. a hurried, "I'm busy, I'll call you back," that never materialized. Gradually, her calls grew fewer, her voice shrinking with each unanswered ring. She didn't want to be a burden, a tiresome echo in their bustling lives, so, for one desperate fleeting moment, she'd almost welcomed the dizzying darkness, the searing pain in her chest, the world tilting before her eyes. She'd collapsed, the apple charlotte she'd been baking left unfinished, a domestic scene abruptly halted. It was this crisis, that had finally drawn them back, her two boys for whom her heart had silently ached for so long. But the deeper she listened, the more their words became sharp shards of glass, tearing at her very soul. She wasn't just alone, she was utterly, devastatingly unnecessary. "And you think I can?" Owen's voice a sarcastic sneer. "Lena's pregnant. Am I supposed to cram a newborn and Mum into our tiny apartment, on top of trying to get this independent film off the ground? You're joking, right?" "No, thank you. Absolutely not. And with what money am I supposed to do all this? Grants are drying up, and I'm barely covering pre-production costs. Lena's not used to this kind of struggle. I'm just trying to keep my head above water." "Well, what's the alternative then?" Spencer pressed, a restaurateur's impatience creeping into his tone. "The doctor said her condition is stable, but she needs constant care, at least initially. After that, we'll see, maybe she'll get better." "You, unlike me, have a stable, profitable business. You could move in with Mum and—" "Don't you dare finish that sentence." Owen practically exploded, his voice sharp and brittle. "Then what do you suggest?" Spencer retorted, his own patience finally snapping. "Actually, I do have an idea. It's been brewing for a while," Owen confessed, his voice dropping, almost conspiratorial. "Honestly, I don't understand why Mum is still living alone in a 3-bedroom apartment. That place isn't really useful to either of us. But we could sell it for a fortune. I looked into it. That neighbourhood is prime real estate, considered historic." "Sell the apartment? Where would Mum live?" Spencer, the logical businessman, sounded genuinely taken aback, a rare crack in his controlled demeanour. "That's exactly what I'm getting at," Owen affirmed, his voice now smooth, almost persuasive. "Let's put her in a care facility. We can cover the costs with the apartment sale and split the rest. She'll get constant care there, all the attention she needs, medical staff on hand, proper meals, everything the doctor's ordered. It's the sensible solution." Owen's voice, though hushed, carried a distinct note of satisfaction, as if he were already tasting the windfall. "What? A nursing home?" Spencer sounded genuinely blindsided. Owen merely clicked his tongue, a dismissive sound. "What's the big deal? Everyone lives there. We're not sending her to some inferno. Besides, she'll have fun. Plenty of activities for seniors, you know, bingo, knitting circles, checkers." He rattled off the suggestions hastily, then, with a surge of unmistakable enthusiasm, steered the conversation back to the topic truly occupying his mind, the inheritance. "The main thing is to get the apartment retitled correctly and sell it fast. You've got connections, right? All those notaries and real estate agents." Owen leaned back, his voice a low, urgent hum. "Look, I desperately need the money right now. I've got to clear up some debts, and Lena wants a pricey stroller for the baby. Plus, she's set on a private clinic for the birth. The nursery needs a complete overhaul." Sarah Jenkins lay there, eyes tightly shut, her breath held so still it was as if life had simply left her. An unbearable hollowness bloomed in her chest, vast and echoing. Her sons murmured for a little longer, their voices a low drone, as they aired their personal grievances, their own financial woes. Soon enough, even Spencer, ever the pragmatic businessman, conceded that the money would come in handy for his own ambitions. He was, after all, planning to open another restaurant, and that required serious capital. Then Owen announced he wanted coffee, and the murmuring ceased. The rustle of their clothes, the light footfalls, then the soft click of the door. They simply walked away. They didn't approach her bed. They didn't check on her, didn't press a kiss to her time-worn cheek, didn't brush a hand through her silvered hair. Hair, she thought with a pang, that had greyed prematurely from years of worry, largely because of them. Not even a whispered, "Mum, just hold on. We're here. We love you." The door opened and closed again, the corridor swallowing the last echoes of their voices. Silence descended upon the room, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the lingering scent of their expensive colognes. Sarah slowly opened her eyes and stared up at the hospital ceiling. A single fluorescent lamp above her flickered mournfully, casting a lonely artificial glow. Even in its cold mechanical sadness, she felt more empathy than from her own flesh and blood. Her gaze drifted to her hands, dry and bony, crisscrossed with veins, like the gnarled roots of an ancient, parched tree, miraculously still clinging to the earth. These weren't the soft manicured hands of the women Lena envied online. No, these were the hands of a lifetime of relentless giving. With these hands, for years she had toiled at the local canning factory, standing for hours in the stifling heat, her fingers raw from repetitive motion, just to bring home a meagre wage. Then she'd rush home, the factory's metallic scent still clinging to her clothes, and use these very same hands to prepare a warm dinner from meagre ingredients, to iron her boys' shirts late into the night for school the next day, and to meticulously darn their socks, making every thread count. Her nails had yellowed early, always brittle and peeling. There had simply never been time for a manicure, not even a thought. Yet she never forgot that Owen needed new guitar strings for his band or money for that directing workshop, or that Spencer needed a new soccer ball and then a tutor for his business classes. Their needs were etched into her memory, a priority above her own. They say that before you die, your entire life flashes before your eyes. But Sarah wasn't dying. Still, vivid images from her past flickered before her inner vision like an old, beloved film reel, each scene a testament to resilience and quiet sacrifice. She involuntarily remembered rising before dawn, the house still cloaked in shadows, and the scent of yesterday's supper, to begin her shift as a kitchen helper at the local diner, spending the day on her feet, serving countless strangers, her back aching by noon. She recalled the countless winter nights she'd bundled herself in layers, walking miles through the biting wind and sometimes even snow to catch the early bus for work, her own worn coat offering little protection, just to ensure they had a warm home and a meal. She remembered selling the only piece of jewellery she owned, a delicate silver locket inherited from her own mother, not for an emergency, but to buy Spencer that worn but coveted set of encyclopedias for his research, or to fund Owen's trip to a weekend film workshop, convinced it was his big break. She remembered the last slice of cake, always untouched by her, carefully left for the children, their eager smiles worth more than any sweetness she could taste. She remembered lying, countless times, saying she was full, giving her boys her own portion of dinner, then drinking water, glass after glass, to fill the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. Yes, looking back, her life had been no picnic. It had been a relentless climb up a jagged mountain, fueled only by a mother's fierce, unwavering love. It had been that way from the very beginning. Sarah was born in a remote rural town. She hadn't received much of a formal education, but she had certainly accumulated a wealth of bitter life experience. Her father drank, his hand often raised against her mother. Her mother, for some inexplicable reason, endured it all, never leaving. Sarah also had an older sister, Brianna. Brianna, unlike Sarah, who was endlessly kind and gentle, possessed a complex, fiery temperament. Yet Sarah still loved her sister, even admiring her boldness and decisiveness, the way Brianna wasn't afraid to argue with their father, or how she'd sneak out of their tiny cottage window to meet boys. Despite their father's strict prohibitions on dating, Brianna loved Sarah too, though she sometimes called her a naive little fool. She often said Sarah was the only thing she truly cherished in that God-forsaken village. Sometimes she called Sarah her home. After finishing high school, Brianna packed her bags and left for the city to train as a train conductor. She declared she wanted to travel the world that way. But when Sarah finished school, everything was different. Their mother fell gravely ill. By then, Brianna had almost entirely cut ties with the family. She didn't return to visit their ailing mother, though Sarah wrote to her sister, called her, even pleaded for help and support. It was all in vain. Sarah herself nursed her mother for nearly a year, but Eleanor eventually passed away peacefully. After the funeral, their father burdened Sarah with all the household chores, ordering her to forget about the city or further education. However, amidst it all, there were things she genuinely loved. For instance, her trips to the city, to the bustling market, to sell homemade milk and fresh eggs. It was there she met David Jenkins, a young student who, judging by his pale complexion and lean build, desperately needed a good home-cooked meal. His kind and family-oriented mother sent him to the market for groceries every weekend. Sarah admitted it freely. She fell for him at first sight. Her love, a quiet, profound thing, expressed itself in subtle, tender ways. She'd heap extra scoops of cottage cheese into his bag, or discreetly add not just a dozen, but 14, sometimes even 15 eggs to his order. Before heading to the city market, she began to dress with a newfound care, a splash of colour, a neatly tied scarf. Later, as their hurried conversations about market prices stretched into lingering moments, their smiles widened, genuine and bright. She started bringing him homemade jams and even warm, flaky pies, their aroma still clinging to the basket. David, a young student with kind eyes and an earnest demeanour, would later tease that Sarah had found the surest path to his heart, straight through his stomach. Their connection grew, quiet and steady, like a gentle stream. At the same time, Sarah's father Peter plunged deeper into the bottle. One terrifying evening, consumed by drink and hallucination, he mistook Sarah for his deceased wife, his eyes wide with a drunken terror that the ghost of his former spouse had come to claim his soul. He lunged at her, brandishing a fireplace poker like a weapon against a phantom. Terrified, Sarah fled the house, the cold night air a stark contrast to the burning fear in her chest. She never looked back. That night, against all odds, fate smiled upon her. She stumbled, breathless and weeping, directly into David's path. When he learned of her desperate plight, without a moment's hesitation, he led her to his family home. Were his parents surprised? Undoubtedly. Their kind-hearted son had a history of dragging home stray kittens and puppies as a child, but a whole human being? This was unprecedented. Yet despite Sarah's profound anxieties, no one cast her out. David's mother, Elizabeth, a woman with a gentle face and even gentler spirit, listened to Sarah's entire heart-breaking story. Her eyes filled with pity, and she offered refuge. "She can stay for a while," Elizabeth sighed, her gaze softening. "We have 3 rooms, we'll find a place. But you must understand, this can't be forever." Yet in the end, it was. Sarah, meek yet diligent, sweet and ever smiling, who rose with the dawn to prepare impossibly delicious cheese pancakes for everyone, so thoroughly charmed the Jenkinses that no one ever wished for her to leave. Time flowed on. Sarah found work, doing what she could without a formal education. Thanks to Elizabeth's quiet efforts, she secured a position as a kitchen assistant in a school cafeteria, eventually working her way up to cook. Later, David finished his studies and began his career. Another year passed, and they celebrated their wedding, a small, joyous affair. Their sons weren't born immediately, but then came one after another, sturdy, wonderful boys. Just when Sarah finally dared to believe that life had laid out a clear, peaceful path before her, thunder struck once more, a devastating blow that splintered her world. In a single crushing day, Sarah lost everything she held dear. David had gone to pick up his father and mother from a friend's country house. Sarah had stayed home with their 2 young children. There wasn't enough room in the car for everyone, and besides, why should she shuttle back and forth? The sky had been heavy with the promise of rain. She was preparing dinner, the rich scent of stew filling the kitchen, when the doorbell rang. Sarah frowned, a flicker of surprise in her chest. Everyone who would call at that hour had a key. She put down the spatula, still dripping gravy, wiped her hands on her apron, and hurried to open the door. Standing on the threshold was a man in a crisp uniform, his gaze heavy with news that promised nothing good. "Sarah Jenkins," he clarified, and when she nodded, numbly, he delivered the words that would forever cleave her life in 2. "I regret to inform you that your husband and relatives have been in an accident. There were no survivors." Sarah vaguely remembered her legs buckling, the world tilting. But she had to manage. No other choice. She had 2 children, and she did everything. She worked until her body ached, until tears pricked her eyes, pushing through the exhaustion and the pain. Everything for them, for her sons. And now they wanted to send her from this apartment, the very place where she had found her peace, her sanctuary, into a nursing home. Sarah lay still, only the corners of her lips trembling, not from physical pain, but from the crushing weight of realization. Then the door creaked open again. She quickly closed her eyes, knowing she wasn't ready to face her sons, to see their indifference. She felt 2 warm, treacherous tears escape from beneath her eyelids, tracing hot paths down her temples. The pain of knowing her sons wanted not her, but only her property, was more excruciating than any illness. But it wasn't her sons who had returned to the room. The footsteps were soft, almost imperceptible. Someone gently touched the blanket, adjusting it over Sarah's chest, tucking her in with a care that felt impossibly tender. Delicate, slender hands brushed her forehead, then gently, silently, wiped away her tears. "Sarah, are you crying?" A startled young woman's voice whispered. Sarah opened her eyes wide, recognizing her. Before her stood the worried face of Eliza. Her neighbour, who had moved in just 6 months ago, one floor above Sarah's. Her eyes, wide and concerned, flickered to Sarah's tear-streaked face. "Why are you crying? Are you in pain? Let me call for a shot, maybe." In Eliza's hands a trembling bouquet of flowers, a mix of white, yellow and soft blue blossoms, felt like a beacon. It looked like a wild meadow gathering, though its neat ribbons proclaimed it store-bought. Sarah sobbed again, but this time it was a sob of profound relief. Someone finally needed her, even if just a little. She was still impossibly needed. "Eliza, no time for a doctor. This pain, it's not that kind," Sarah confessed, her voice raspy, a whisper of old sorrows. Then a touch of curiosity cut through her haze. "But you, how did you get here?" Eliza clutched the flowers to her chest, their fresh scent a gentle comfort in the sterile air. "Oh, I called the paramedics and rode here with you," Eliza explained, her brow furrowed with concern. "I was at the farmer's market and brought you those plums you liked last time, and some vegetables, potatoes, onions. So you wouldn't have to carry them. I rang the bell, but you didn't answer. At first, I thought you'd gone out, and I was going to haul the bags upstairs, but they were so heavy, so I decided to use the spare key. Remember? You left me one just in case, after you forgot to turn off your iron." Sarah managed a weak, tremulous smile and nodded. Yes, just a few weeks back, a truly frightening incident. She'd been distracted, perhaps by a memory, and had hurried out of the apartment, leaving the iron dangerously plugged in. Eliza, returning from her morning walk, had noticed a faint wisp of smoke curling from Sarah's open kitchen window. She had immediately spotted Sarah just down the street, heading towards the post office, completely oblivious. With a shout, Eliza had raced to her, alerting her to the danger. Flustered and trembling, Sarah had immediately fumbled for her keys, pressing them into Eliza's hand. Eliza had then sprinted back to the apartment, burst in, and averted what could have been a serious fire, becoming something of a quiet hero in their small building. After that, a grateful Sarah had insisted Eliza keep a spare set of keys for any future just-in-case moments, despite Eliza's humble protests. And now they had proved their worth once more. Eliza, who lived in an orphanage since she was 4, sadly, while some orphans were lucky enough to find good placements, Eliza had drawn a particularly bad card. First, she endured the neglect of indifferent caregivers, and worse, she had a room with girls who were the very embodiment of cruelty and hazing. Eliza was eventually placed with a foster family, but her time as a cherished daughter was heartbreakingly short. Soon, her adoptive parents sent her back, deciding quite simply that they no longer wanted a daughter. No other reasons were given. Eliza had been obedient, kind and sweet, but she simply hadn't suited them. Then came another family. They took in the child, a beautiful girl with eyes like blue lakes and a copper cap of hair, hoping to save their crumbling marriage. Alas, no miracle occurred. Her newly minted parents divorced a year later, and once again she was unwanted by either. They divided their apartment, their car, their garage, even their furniture. But they didn't divide Eliza. They simply returned her to the orphanage. Again. Through it all, the betrayal, the deprivation, the cruelty, the girl miraculously managed to retain her inherent goodness, though she grew quiet and sometimes carried the wary, heartbroken gaze of a stray dog. And now she worked as an elementary school teacher, her windowsills filled with flourishing, potted plants. She loved to read and adored hot cocoa, yet even in her quiet life, she still encountered unkind people with venomous tongues, those who believed that being an orphan was a brand, proof that you were societal refuse, destined for a crooked path leading straight to prison. Once, when Eliza had just graduated from college, she even had to change schools. Parents had raised a furious uproar, declaring they wouldn't have their children taught by that girl. The truth, of course, the real ugly reason for the scandal, lay far deeper and was much more unsavoury. A certain parent, Mr. Ramos, a man whose polished charm felt more like a thinly veiled disguise, had taken a keen interest in the young pretty teacher. He had started bringing and picking up his son Owen from school every day, a stark contrast to his usual distant parenting. He'd even shown an alarming fascination with Owen's homework and school projects. Eliza, always professional and reserved, had deftly sidestepped his attempts at flirtation. Compliments about her bright auburn hair or her tailored blouses were met with polite, unsmiling nods. The bouquets of crimson roses he occasionally left on her desk usually found their way into the staff-room bin, a silent rejection. But when his invitations became overtly suggestive, thinly veiled requests for private tutoring sessions or discussions about Owen's extracurricular development, a shiver of revulsion ran down her spine. Yet Mr. Ramos wasn't easily deterred. Her cool refusals seemed to ignite a perverse fascination in him, a desire to conquer the unattainable. Of course his wife, Mrs. Ramos, a woman with eyes as sharp as cut glass, wasn't foolish. She quickly discerned the shifting currents of her husband's attention and the true reason for his newfound dedication to school pickup. But instead of reining in her Don Juan, Mrs. Ramos unleashed her fury on Eliza. She stormed the school office, declaring that this fiery redhead was a man-stealer and a shameless temptress. "What could a woman like that possibly teach our children?" she had shrieked, her voice echoing down the hall. Driven by a desperate need for ammunition, she dug into Eliza's past, unearthing the painful truth of her childhood spent in foster care. This revelation, twisted and distorted, was then flung like gasoline onto the flames of public indignation, cementing the perception that Eliza was somehow damaged or unfit. In a fit of jealous rage, Mrs. Ramos rallied a small but vocal group of parents. Under the chilling banner of "Burn the Scarlet Woman," they descended upon the principal's office, demanding Eliza's immediate dismissal. The principal, a kind man caught between a rock and a hard place, knew the accusations were baseless, a cruel absurdity, but to avoid a full-blown scandal that could tarnish the school's reputation, he regretfully asked Eliza to resign voluntarily. He promised to help her secure a position at another school, emphasizing that good educators were always in demand. With a heavy heart, she agreed. It was after this unsettling chapter that a new, comforting presence entered her life: Sarah Jenkins. Their friendship began with small, unassuming acts of kindness. Eliza first encountered Sarah at the local market, her small frame struggling with bulging canvas bags. Without a second thought, Eliza offered to help carry them back to the quiet brownstone where they both lived, just a few floors apart. Inside the bags, among fresh herbs and ripe tomatoes, lay a plump head of green cabbage and 2 bags of flour, the makings of Sarah's famous savoury pies. In gratitude, Sarah baked a fragrant apple pie, its cinnamon aroma filling the hallway, and shared a generous slice with Eliza. In return, Eliza brought over a stack of her light, fluffy buttermilk pancakes. And so their bond quietly blossomed, like a resilient vine finding new purchase. Then one crisp autumn morning, Sarah fell ill. She'd mentioned it to her sons during a brief phone call, but their responses were clipped and distant. "Hope you feel better, Mum." However, when Eliza learned of Sarah's ailment, she didn't hesitate. Rolling up her sleeves, she set about nursing the older woman back to health. She ran to the pharmacy for prescriptions, concocted soothing chicken noodle soup because Sarah was too weak to stand at the stove. She brought groceries and, perhaps most importantly, found time to simply be with her. They spent hours together, watching classic old movies and light-hearted sitcoms, often dissolving into giggles over the characters' predicaments. Sarah, with nimble fingers, taught Eliza to knit intricate patterns and how to make preserves, explaining her secret method for burying jars of apricot jam deep in the pantry for a burst of sunshine on a cold winter's day. Eliza, in turn, read her favourite historical novels aloud, her voice a comforting balm, as Sarah's eyesight had begun to dim. She even became Sarah's resident tech expert, patiently fixing her smartphone whenever the screen went blank or everything just disappeared. One rainy afternoon, Eliza arrived at Sarah's door, her smile wide and familiar, her boots slick with rain. Sarah immediately fussed over her, eager to warm her with a steaming mug of herbal tea, but as she admired the auburn-haired young woman, she couldn't help but ask, "Aren't you bored, my dear Eliza? You have all your youth ahead of you, and all I have are my blood pressure woes, aching knees, and faded memories." Eliza paused, considering her answer, then confessed, "You know, I always dreamed of having my own home. Then I finally got my apartment, and I was truly, truly happy. And it is good there, honestly, but I only really found home when I met you. After all, home isn't about painted walls or a ceiling above your head. It's not a place, it's a person." "A person?" Sarah echoed, her hands trembling slightly, forcing her to fold them in her lap beneath the table. Eliza nodded. "I don't remember much from my early childhood, but my mother used to tell me a little about her life, and she always added that home is the person you want to return to. And now, when I walk to your door, I feel like I'm coming home, even today. I could have run up 2 flights of stairs and entered my own apartment, but I still came here, chilled and hungry. And not because you have warm, dry slippers and a soft blanket, but because it feels like you've always been here. As if I knew you when I was just a little girl, or even before that." She hesitated, offering a crooked, lopsided smile, and Sarah's heart did a surprising flip. "I know it sounds like nonsense, but I answered honestly, just how I feel." Sarah remained silent. Her lips trembled and pressed together, as they always did when she was trying to hide her emotions. But her eyes, those betraying eyes, shimmered with unshed tears, and her hands instinctively pushed a small crystal dish of leftover cookies towards Eliza. Cream cheese cookies, the kind Eliza loved, and the kind one other person had adored. Indeed, with Eliza by her side, Sarah seemed to find a second wind. She laughed and smiled more often, took more walks, and found joy in the small wonders of each day. And now, judging by Eliza's story, she even had saved her life. If Eliza hadn't brought the groceries, if she'd been too afraid to use the spare key to enter, it might have been too late. Sarah wouldn't be looking at her now, her eyes filled with weary gratitude. Eliza remembered the moment as if it were yesterday, stepping into the quiet apartment, the television still murmuring to itself, and the insistent, frantic meows of Mr. Puggles, Sarah's fluffy Persian cat. It wasn't the sound of a hungry cat, but a deeply distressed one, a chilling siren. A tremor of unease shivered through Eliza. She rushed to the kitchen, and there, crumpled on the cool tile, was Sarah. Eliza's heart seized. She immediately knelt, her fingers fumbling for a pulse at Sarah's wrist, then dialed for emergency services, her voice shaking as she relayed the address. Eliza squeezed the stems of the wild bouquet she'd brought, crumpling the tender leaves the florist had carefully left untouched. "I was so scared, Sarah," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Scared that you wouldn't be okay." The raw emotion in her voice, the lingering tremor in her hands, showed that the memory still deeply troubled her. Sarah reached out, her frail fingers brushing Eliza's. Eliza released the bruised flowers and gently clasped the older woman's hand, the touch a comforting anchor. She timidly perched on the edge of the hospital bed, blinking back tears, forcing a tremulous smile. "Please forgive me for getting so emotional. The important thing is that everything's all right now." Eliza sighed, gathering her composure, trying to push the lingering fear away. Just then the door creaked open, and the doctor stepped in. He was a young man, his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, hiding a gaze that held either immense wisdom or profound exhaustion. His eyes flickered to Eliza, who had instantly sprung up from Sarah's bedside. He blinked, his gaze momentarily snagging on the vibrant cascade of Eliza's auburn hair, pulled back into a thick, fiery ponytail. Such a vivid splash of colour in the stark white room. "Good morning," he said, his voice polite. "Are you family?" Eliza flinched, opening her mouth to explain, to correct him. But before she could speak, Sarah lifted her head from the pillow, straightening as much as her age and the IV drip allowed. With a slight rasp, but clear as a bell, she declared, "Yes, this is my niece, Eliza." Eliza gasped softly, a jolt of surprise mingling with an unexpected warmth. She was nearly the same age as Sarah's own younger son, Owen, but the tender word niece felt profoundly right, a perfect fit for a place she hadn't known she was missing. Eliza didn't contradict her. The doctor, seemingly unconvinced, allowed a knowing smile to play on his lips, beautifully carved into a perfect Cupid's bow. It was a smile that said, "Whatever you say." It was clear his primary concern was Sarah's cardiac health, not her family dynamics. "Well then, Eliza," he continued, turning back to Sarah's chart, "your aunt will require consistent care after discharge. Do you have the time and energy for that?" Eliza straightened, feeling suddenly taller, imbued with a fierce determination. "Believe me, there's nothing in this world I don't have the strength for," she stated, barely resisting the urge to roll her eyes at his sceptical tone. The doctor suppressed a chuckle. "Very well. I'll leave you the discharge instructions. You can take your aunt home tomorrow morning." He nodded, and the door clicked shut again. The door once more became a harbinger of change in the quiet room. Standing on the threshold were Sarah's two sons, starkly different like night and day. Spencer in a sharp charcoal suit, a cell phone pressed to his ear, his short hair meticulously styled, and Owen, slouching in a faded hoodie, his longish hair peeking out from under the hood, framing his glasses. They were a study in contrasts, but their surprise at the new person in the room was identical. Their astonishment only deepened when they heard their mother introduce Eliza as her niece, and Eliza confirm her intention to care for her, a direct threat to their meticulously laid plans to usher their mother into a care facility. "What the hell is this?" Owen grumbled, his shoulders tensing, his brows furrowed above his nose. "Young lady, if you don't mind my asking, Where exactly did you get out from?" Spencer asked, his voice laced with thinly veiled suspicion. "From the floor above, actually," Eliza replied ingeniously, finally arranging the flowers in a small vase on the bedside table. "Ah, the neighbour," Spencer murmured, a frown creasing his forehead. He vaguely remembered some mention of an Eliza in scattered messages from his mother over the past year, maybe even longer. However, he'd assumed Eliza was a woman of his mother's generation, and frankly, he hadn't cared much about how his mother was spending her twilight years. "And what, pray tell, is your connection to our mother?" Spencer asked, crossing his arms over his chest. "We just bonded," Eliza stammered, shrinking slightly under his piercing gaze, which seemed to scan her for any trace of deceit. "Is that so?" Spencer raised a perfectly sculpted dark eyebrow. "You know, I recently heard a similar story. Scammers wormed their way into an elderly woman's trust and ended up with her apartment." The implication hung heavy in the air. Eliza paled at the thinly veiled accusation. "What? No, I don't want her apartment. I just out of the goodness of your heart, decided to befriend an old woman who could be your aunt." Spencer scoffed, a sneer playing on his lips. "Spencer, that's enough," Sarah exclaimed, her voice trembling with agitation. "If that's how it's going to be—" She paused, looking first at one son, then the other, her gaze unwavering. Then, with a sudden surge of strength, she declared, "I am signing my apartment over to Eliza. Is that clear?" "Because she cared for me. Because she's the only person who came to this hospital to hold my hand and bring me flowers, not to discuss whether they could stash me in a nursing home and sell off my apartment as quickly as possible." The two men flinched, their carefully constructed composure crumbling as they realized they'd been caught. Sarah, her face flushed with emotion, continued, "That's quite enough from both of you, boys. I gave you my entire self, down to the last drop of blood, the last nerve cell." "You know," she said, her voice softening with a pain that transcended the physical, "I would understand if I had been a bad mother. I know what it means to live badly better than most, but I tried to be a good mother. I tried with all my might, and in the end, I raised two absolute egoists who think only of their own gain. So that's it. You will not get a single penny from me. If you want love and kind words, if you want my homemade soup or pies, then please, my door will always be open to you. However, if all you want is the last scrap from me, my apartment, then don't even dream of it. I will transfer everything to Eliza, to the one who has become my home in my old age." Eliza gasped, pressing her hands to her mouth. She had never wanted to find herself in such an impossible situation. Owen's jaw muscles flexed, a telltale sign of his simmering rage, while Spencer's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. The younger brother, always more prone to emotional outbursts, was the first to lash out. "How can you, Mum? Are you just spiteful? You act like a care facility is some kind of dungeon. It would be better for you there, and after this insane idea to give your apartment to some stranger, I'm even more convinced. You need your head examined. You've clearly lost your mind to come up with such a scheme. You don't even really know her." Sarah paled, recoiling from the harsh, stinging words of her son. "Please don't," Eliza pleaded, her gaze flickering to Sarah, whose frail body seemed to shrink under the verbal assault. "Your mother just came to, sir. Why are you doing this?" "And you," Owen snapped, turning his venomous gaze on Eliza. "Stay out of this. This is our family business. What are you, some kind of con artist, trying to trick an old woman out of her home?" He lunged forward and Sarah gasped. A frightened sound caught in her throat. "Young man, remember where you are." A calm, firm voice interjected. Dr. Shaw, a man of imposing height and quiet authority, stepped deliberately in front of Eliza. His presence, solid and unwavering, seemed to dwarf Owen. "The emergency room is just downstairs. If necessary, I can personally escort you." Dr. Shaw had a zero-tolerance policy for any form of aggression, especially when a man attempted to intimidate a woman. The impulsive Owen skidded to a halt, reconsidering his attack on Eliza, whom he might have managed, but certainly not the broad-shouldered, 6-foot cardiologist. "This applies to everyone," the doctor said, sweeping his gaze across the room, encompassing the volatile brothers. "Firstly, you are in a hospital, not a courtroom. Secondly, Eliza is correct. My patient has just begun to recover, and this kind of argument and stress are strictly prohibited." He paused, his voice taking on a chillingly detached tone. "Unless, of course, you wish to hasten the inevitable fight over her inheritance. In that case, by all means, carry on. Then may God have mercy on your souls." The doctor's words, though delivered with professional calm, were devastatingly direct, and they landed with shocking impact. Spencer placed a restraining hand on his brother's shoulder, but his eyes, dark and stormy, fixed on Eliza. "We'll revisit our fascinating conversation," Spencer stated, his tone more threat than promise. "And rest assured I won't let this go. Legally, you are a nobody, even if my mother has decided otherwise." At this, Sarah looked her elder son directly in the eye and to their surprise spoke. "Spencer, sadly you are mistaken," she said, shaking her head slowly. "And if you go looking for the truth, you will find far more than you bargained for, believe me. And if you don't take my word for it, then drive over to my home, if you still remember the way. In the bottom drawer of my dresser you'll find a file. Many of your questions will be answered there." Spencer frowned, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face, as if he too now wondered if his mother's mind was truly sound. However, under the doctor's stern gaze, he didn't argue. Muttering his perfunctory "get well," Spencer exited the room. Owen, scoffing, bolted out after his brother. Sarah smiled, a soft, wistful expression that held a hint of melancholy and nostalgia. She noticed the doctor subtly glancing at Eliza throughout the confrontation. Eliza, the fiery redhead, was adjusting the flowers in the vase, completely oblivious to the interested gazes being cast her way. So, Sarah decided a little matchmaking was well within her capabilities. "Dr. Shaw, are you married?" Sarah asked, catching him completely off guard. Dr. Shaw had seen and heard many things in his career, especially from patients coming out of anesthesia. Just recently, a man had earnestly begged him to return his bones that Armando hadn't even taken. But this now brought a blush to his cheeks. "Well, I wasn't this morning," he admitted with a sheepish grin. "But I'm afraid nothing could ever happen between us. You, Mum, are a truly wonderful woman, no doubt. I've even seen your rich inner world, quite literally. I have the X-rays to prove it. However, if I were to propose to you, your sons would accuse me of fraud as well, and honestly, I don't need an apartment. I've earned my own, through my hard work and, well, a fair bit of other people's blood on my scalpel." Sarah burst into laughter again, a clear, ringing sound that filled the sterile room. Even Eliza snorted with amusement, a small laugh escaping her. "Oh, I wasn't asking for myself," Sarah clarified, waving a dismissive hand. "I was asking for my niece. She's single, by the way, and she's an absolutely wonderful homemaker and a truly loving person." Eliza gasped, spinning sharply to face the newly declared aunt, her cheeks flaming. "Sarah!" she sputtered, utterly mortified. "What are you doing?" "What's wrong with that?" the patient declared, looking utterly pleased with herself. "I just asked a simple question." Meanwhile, while Sarah was busy attempting to orchestrate Eliza's love life, her two sons were hurtling down the highway towards their mother's apartment building. It had been years, perhaps even a decade, since either of them had truly lingered within those walls. Confessedly, as the sleek black sedan ate up the miles, both men were tormented by an unpleasant gnawing sensation. Conscience, a seldom heard whisper in their bustling lives, was now a persistent, biting ache. "Listen," Owen began, his voice a low rumble. "Did Mum ever tell you her washing machine broke?" "Yeah, she mentioned it once," Spencer recalled, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. "I thought you'd fix it, since you were travelling so much." "And I thought you'd fix it, or buy a new one," Owen retorted, a flush creeping up his neck. "I mean, you were always so busy with your restaurant openings." Then, like a swarm of persistent annoying flies, memories began to buzz around them. They remembered their mother's gentle pleas to visit for Thanksgiving or her birthday, her hopeful requests for help setting up a social media profile, explaining her friends were all on it. She'd asked them to teach her how to pay utility bills online, and always their answer had been, "No time," or "Too busy." Yet they also remembered that their mother had never been too busy. She always had time for a meticulously crafted costume for a school play, time to cheer at Spencer's soccer matches, or applaud Owen's amateur theatre productions. She had time to wash their uniforms and press their shirts, to cook endless breakfasts and dinners. She had time for them, but never for herself. Owen in particular remembered the sharp pang of shame when he hadn't invited his mother to his wedding. No, not just because it was an intimate ceremony, though that was part of it. It was because his fiancée, Chloe, came from a prominent artistic family with bohemian friends, and his mother, she was just simple, a bit provincial, and far too old, her hands weathered, her face lined. Not someone to boast about, unlike Chloe's mother. Chloe's mother was vibrant, youthful, her face artfully sculpted by the best cosmetic surgeons. Now, a deep, pervasive shame settled over him, a profound, aching regret. Only, it was probably too late for any of it to matter. When the brothers finally stepped into the apartment where they'd spent their childhood and youth, they hesitated on the threshold. It felt foreign, quiet, steeped in memories that no longer belonged to them. Here they were merely guests, nothing more. And suddenly, the apartment didn't feel quite so essential. "I'll check the dresser. I don't understand what Mum was talking about." Spencer mumbled, his voice unusually subdued, and he walked into his mother's bedroom. He quickly found what he was looking for, an old, worn file folder. Not filled with legal documents, but with photographs and letters. A beautiful woman, strikingly similar to their mother, stood next to a red-haired man. A tiny, red-haired girl cradled in his arms. And there were letters, addressed to their mother, written in a graceful script. A beautiful woman, strikingly similar to their mother, stood next to a red-haired man. A tiny, red-haired girl cradled in his arms. And there were letters, addressed to their mother, written in a graceful script by a sister named Brianna. It was from these letters that the brothers finally understood. Eliza was not a stranger at all. She was their cousin, though she had no idea. That same evening, sitting by Sarah's hospital bed, Eliza gently chided her. "You shouldn't have said all that to your sons. You've created a rift," she sighed, her heart aching for the older woman. "I know how much you love them." "I do love them, but I didn't lie." Sarah looked at Eliza, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I am leaving the apartment to you." "What? No, I don't need it." Eliza shook her head vehemently. "And how could you? They're your own flesh and blood, and I'm just—" "And you, Eliza, are my niece. And you, Eliza, are my niece." Sarah finally exhaled, preparing to unveil a truth held captive for decades. "I was afraid to tell you. I thought you would turn away from me, because once, long ago, I could have saved you from a difficult fate, but I didn't." Her voice trembled, raw with confession. "Now, as I faced death, I understood that it's better to have no secrets left unspoken." "I don't understand," Eliza whispered, shaking her head, her brow furrowed in confusion. Then Sarah confessed. "I understood everything when you talked about your mother, even before you said her name. Brianna, the name of my sister who ran away from home." The older woman breathed, the words heavy with history. "She ran, leaving me with a sick mother and a cruel, drunken father. I was terribly angry with her, deeply hurt, but I still wrote her letters for a long time. I never received a reply. Then my own life began to mend. I met David, had my sons, and slowly I pushed the past away. But it knocked on my door again, years later, when I was completely unprepared. I had already buried my husband and his parents. I was living alone with 2 young boys on my hands. I hadn't even truly gotten back on my feet when I learned my sister was ill. She became sick, just like our own mother had years before. She wrote to me, begging me to take care of her daughter. She sent your photo, a picture of a little red-haired girl, so small and utterly lovely. She said you had a father, but he drank and couldn't care for you. She also wrote that she felt it was her karma for abandoning me all those years ago, and now she was simply repeating our mother's fate. But I ignored that letter. After all, you had your own father, and I had more than enough troubles of my own." Sarah's voice cracked, thick with the weight of old choices. "Life was hard for me, truly difficult, but how could I take on the responsibility of a niece as well? And then I learned your father had succumbed to his drinking, and you were taken to a foster home. I was ashamed, deeply ashamed, partly for Brianna, but it was too late. When I finally went to the foster home, not even knowing what I would do, I discovered you had already been placed with a family. I breathed a sigh of relief. I didn't know your difficult journey hadn't ended there. And then," her voice wavered, and her gaze pierced Eliza's face, "and then fate came full circle, and you returned yourself. You came home, Eliza. You have the same smile as your mother, and you love cream cheese cookies and hot cocoa, just like my sister. I didn't realize it right away, but it was Brianna who always told me that home isn't a place, it's people. She never felt at home in the village with our father, but sometimes, after arguments with him, I would hug her, feeling sorry for her. She would hug me back and say that I was her home. That's why it was so hard to lose her." A profound silence settled in the hospital room, thick with the weight of years and revelations. "Can you forgive me?" Sarah finally whispered, the question hanging fragile in the air. "There's nothing to forgive," Eliza murmured, her voice thick with emotion, and the 2 women embraced, tears of pure happiness mingling on their cheeks. Just outside the hospital room door, Dr. Armando Shaw stood, holding 2 steaming cups of hot cocoa he had brought from the coffee shop downstairs. A soft smile touched his lips as he heard their tearful exchange. He decided wisely to enter later, This moment was theirs. A year had spun by, much like a vibrant quilt being pieced together, stitch by loving stitch. In Sarah's sun-drenched kitchen, the air was thick with the sweet scent of sugar and vanilla, mingling with the unmistakable aroma of freshly baked happiness. Sarah and Eliza were meticulously arranging cream cheese cookies on cooling racks. They worked with focused care, for today was a special day. Dr. Armando Shaw, who was no longer just Sarah's cardiologist, but Eliza's fiancé, was coming to visit. Truth be told, Eliza's newly acquired cousins, Spencer and Owen, hadn't quite given their full approval of Armando yet, but he was diligently working on it. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, life in Sarah's home had truly begun to mend. Her sons visited more frequently now, and undeniably, it wasn't for the apartment. They had finally confronted their past oversights, the cold neglect that had stung their mother so deeply. A quiet understanding of their mistakes had settled within them, and they were actively trying to mend what had been broken before it was truly too late. Now, Sarah no longer had to worry about how to carry heavy bags of groceries from the market. Instead, her pleasant dilemma was where to store the overflowing bounty, as both sons arrived each week with overflowing bags of fresh produce. Furthermore, Spencer and Owen had decided to forego any claim to their inheritance in Eliza's favour, honouring their mother's wishes. However, this time it was Eliza who demurred, insisting that if she was to be truly a part of this family, everything must be divided 3 ways. But for now, thoughts of wills and inheritances felt far off, distant, and utterly unnecessary. Sarah was truly blossoming, regaining her youthful glow before their very eyes. Like an ancient parched tree that had languished in ungiving soil, starved of sun and water, she was now vibrant once more, drawing strength and vitality from the loving care of those closest to her. Even her heart, once fragile, had grown strong again. And it wasn't from medication alone, but from the boundless love that had filled it to overflowing. It was here, in this new-found familial warmth, that the true key to youth and happiness lay hidden, waiting to be discovered.